The speaking part 3 of the IELTS test is one that throws up a lot of challenges for most non-native users of the English language. This is because this is a part that is called the discussion area or an interview area. Here, you will be asked abstract questions that will be derived from the topic that you talked about in your part 2. There's a very huge chance that here you will be thrown questions that you do not have any idea about. It is perfectly okay to be clueless about some of the questions that will be asked in the part 3, as we have seen this happen a lot of times. You can prepare for the part 3, but it will be very, how would I say it, impossible for you to exhaust all the possibilities or the types of questions that could be asked in your part 3. So what can you do to prepare for it? What can you do to ensure that you get that desired score that you want in the speaking part 3 of the IELTS test? Please come along with me and I will share those success strategies and tips with you that I would advise you to please practice as much as possible before you do take the test. The speaking part 3 has a total duration of between 4 to 5 minutes, and it's called the interview or the discussion part of the IELTS. Here, you will be asked to predict, analyze, compare, give opinion. Predict, analyze, compare, or give your opinion about a particular concept or a particular topic or a particular view or a particular claim or concept that will be assigned to you. Here, the theme is always related to what you discussed in your part 2. So what implications does this have for you? It means that immediately you get your cue card for the long term in your part 2, you can as well start predicting the type of questions that you will get in your part 3. I'll take that again. Once you get your cue card for your long term in your part 2, you can start predicting the type of questions that you will get in your part 3. And how do you do this? If I get a question that has to do with museums, immediately my mind starts dredging up all the vocabulary or all the things that I know about museums, about art, and about appreciation of history. Because I know that chances are that when I get to my part 3, 1 or 2 of these areas will come up in the questions that will be asked. If I get a question about describing a shopping mall that I have visited in my part 2, I do know that in my part 3, I will be talking about shopping as it deals with a lot of people, or the concept of buying and selling, or even the concept of advertising. All these are areas that psychologically prepare you for what you will be dealing with in your part 3. And this is an essential part of your journey towards success in the IELTS. You would also be given questions from a range of areas, and the topics include the following: technology, education, environment, TV influence, leisure activities, shopping, sports, transportation, and advertising. I'll take those areas again, and this is not an exhaustive list. You have a lot of areas where the questions could come from, but these are the most commonly asked areas or topics that usually crop up in the IELTS. You have technology, education, the environment, TV influence, leisure activities, shopping, sports, transportation, and advertising. As much as possible, you want to prepare yourself for these topics. And if all of these areas that I've listed out, look at them. Is any of them one of the areas where if I told you that you're supposed to speak about transportation now, would you take a 3 to 5 minutes pause before you can think of something to say? That is an easy test to test yourself if you're prepared to talk about any of those topics. Any of them that would give you a significant 10 to 5 seconds pause before you can think of anything to say about it is one that you should do a lot of research on, because you obviously do not have enough vocabulary or you do not have enough competence to discuss it. A lot of test takers tell me that my tip here contradicts what I said earlier about the IELTS being a test of communication and not a test of intelligence. Yes, it is still a test of communication and not a test of intelligence. Even though the topics here are topics that could task your intelligence, are topics that you may be clueless about, they really do not need you to have some in-depth specialist knowledge about it. So, in the question about technology, nobody will ask you to detail what technology looks like, or to detail or to go ahead and use specialist knowledge terms or to use industry specific terms to describe technology. All they will be asking you will be about your opinion about the use of technology, or your ideas about the general perception towards technology, or you could be asked to compare the use of technology now and in the past, or now and in the future. Comparison is a very integral part of the part 3, and this is something that a lot of people mistake for an intelligence question. No, all they need you to do is to compare a concept as it exists now, or as it exists in the future, or as it used to exist in the past. Or you could be asked to compare a concept as it exists or as it occurs somewhere and in another place, maybe in developed countries and in the developing world. All these comparisons are actually targeted at checking what vocabulary or how you express yourself when you are comparing two or more things. For the comparison that has to do with the past, the present, and the future, obviously your tenses are what will be looked at. And for the comparison that has to do with different places or different time or different people, what will be looked at are what are appropriate vocabulary items that you use to express comparison. But I digress. And then you would also be asked to, how are education priorities different from in the present and in the past? This is just a type of question that could come out for comparison. Now, the comparison part is one that I would like to flesh out a bit also. There's something called a timeline question in the IELTS. A timeline question is a question that requires you to talk about a particular concept or topic across two different time periods. You must use at least two different time periods in talking about that particular concept or topic. And this topic or concept is usually under the comparison aspect of the speaking part 3. So you could be asked a question that says, do you think the kind of houses that people like now has changed from what they used to like in the past? Do you think that in the future more people will rely on ebooks than paperback books? Do you think that a lot of people do you think that the definition of happiness is the same now as it used to be in the future, in the past? Do you think more people will value the same things in society now as they used to do in the past? All these are questions that all fall under the timeline question, the timeline format. And what do I mean by this? In answering these questions, you must try as much as possible to align your answers to show this concept or that topic, how it exists now and it exists before or as it will exist in the future. And in doing this, you're going to rely heavily on your knowledge of tenses. The verbs that convey tense, the verbs that convey the different aspects of tenses are very important for you to use. So in your part 3, your tenses are quite essential and you should watch out for them. The timeline questions are easy questions, but they are questions that give you an opportunity to show off your knowledge of tenses. Do not miss them. The next time you hear a question that has any time element embedded in it, either past, present, future, or now, before, or later, all those words are words that indicate a time element in a question. Watch out for them and ensure that you use your knowledge of tenses to relate those concepts or those topics to different time zones or different time periods. For example, as the definition of happiness, as the way people perceive happiness changed from the past to now. Or do people see happiness in the same way as they used to in the past? So my answer would be happiness. Nowadays, most people equate happiness with financial freedom. Whereas in the past, people used to think of happiness in terms of how much you have achieved or how well brought up your family is. But nowadays, the reverse is the case. And I believe that in the future, a lot of people will define happiness by the amount of money you have as opposed to what we used to have in the past. I've been able to relate this answer to the three different time elements, and in doing that, I was able to use the particular tenses, the particular words that indicated that I was speaking in the present tense, in the past tense, and I'm also talking about something that would happen in the future. This is a very easy way to get good scores in the IELTS, and you should not disregard the importance of a timeline questions. So, what are the things that you should do in the speaking part 3? Number 1, listen for keywords in the question. Why is this important? The questions in your speaking part 3 are relatively longer than what you get in your part 1 or in your part 2. So there's a tendency that you might hear a question, and in starting your answer, you could forget the question itself. So how do you guard against this? Listen for the keywords in the question. So if a question says, has the definition of happiness changed from the past to the present? Your keyword there is what? Happiness. So if a question asks you about what the choices or people's preferences when it comes to building houses, your keyword there is what? Building houses. You must be able to identify a keyword in each question, because the keyword is the concept that you will be talking about. You do not want to cram the whole question, because some questions are quite long, and you also do not want to put yourself in a situation where you keep on asking the examiner for clarification. I will talk more about clarification and referencing later on, because these are essential skills that could be deployed in the speaking test for the IELTS. But you do not want to ask for clarification over and over again. In your part 3, which is a 4 to 5 minute section, you could be asked maybe 7 to 8 questions, and you do not want to ask for clarification in 7 out of 8 questions. This automatically shows the examiner that your communicative competence is not as advanced or developed as you think it is. The next thing is this: ask if you do not understand. Although I mentioned that clarification is important, you do not want to overdo it. But in a culture like in Nigeria, where I come from, a lot of people see asking questions or asking for clarification as a disrespectful thing. In Nigeria, where I come from, asking for clarification from an authority figure like a teacher or an examiner is considered disrespectful. But this is not the case in the IELTS. Please ensure that you are clear about the question that you're answering. Ensure that you understand what has been asked of you before you answer. If you do not understand, ask for clarification. Clarification is an important part of the communication process, and it would not reduce your scores. A lot of people ask me, if I ask for clarification, wouldn't that drop my scores? No, it will only drop your scores when you overdo it. 7 times out of 8 questions you're asking for clarification, definitely this is wrong. But 4 times out of 8 times, 3 times out of 8 times, asking for clarification is not a bad thing at all. You can ask for clarification on a wide range of things. You can ask for a question to be repeated. You can ask for a particular concept for a particular word or expression to be repeated or clarified for you. When asking for clarification, a lot of people ask me, what should I say? Should I say, come again? Should I say, can you repeat yourself? Those expressions, I find them quite impolite. When you're asking for clarification, or when you're asking the examiner for clarification, endeavor to use the word could instead of can. Could sounds more polite than can. Can sounds like you're putting a compulsion on the examiner, asking the examiner if he has the capacity to give you that answer or to repeat the question. And that's not what you're doing. What you're asking for is permission. Could you please repeat the question again? Oh, sorry, I didn't get that. Could you repeat it again? Could I take that question again? Could you clarify what you mean by this particular expression? These are the easy ways to ask for clarification. I see a lot of people come up with different formats, words like pardon, words like sorry. Do not just say sorry for the sake of saying sorry. Always ensure that you add something to that word. When you say sorry, ask for clarification. Sorry, I do not understand. Sorry, could we move to the next question? Sorry, I think I've answered the question. Sorry, I think that completely answers the question. Sorry, I think that's all I have to say about that particular question. Sorry alone is not a clarification, and it does not tell the examiner anything. You are not apologizing for anything if you do not add something to the word sorry.